you do support it, and 5 of you said no. We had a really short time to vote this morning. But for those of you who voted, 9 of you said yes, you do support the reduction in the fuel subsidy at this time, and 5 of you said no, you don't. Of course, you can continue to vote on this poll throughout the rest of the day through all programming, and we'll give you the final result tomorrow morning.
Recording in progress.
All right, thank you, Richie Rich. Of course, let's bring in and introduce you to our guest this morning, Dr. Vaalmikki Arjoon. Good morning, how are you?
Hi, good morning, and good morning to all your listeners out there, and good morning to, by extension, Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, thank you so much.
And
of course, as you see, we have Paul and Richard and Wendell.
How are you this morning?
Oh, very good, thanks. Very good.
That background looked like the old Power 2 studio, but you're still there with it.
The what, sorry?
Your background.
Uh-huh. This is actually my kind of like my study.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're moving the old Power 2 studio, I understand. We get it. Thanks for joining us this morning. All right, your initial overall impression of budget 2022-2023.
So, well, first of all, the budget, I think, as usual, as a matter of fact, and I can actually see why the minister would have done this, because the numbers are looking good in one aspect, right? The deficit has been brought down substantially. In fact, we're looking at probably the lowest deficit we've had in over 10 years, right? So I think that is something that the country could smile about, and especially the Minister of Finance, given where the stressful position that he's sitting in. Of course, keeping in mind, however, that the financial situation of the country is still not that encouraging as I would like it to be, given that we've had about 6 years of an overall deficit of 64 billion, largely driven by the pandemic, of course, and a negative growth of close to 20% since about 2015 or so. But I think that given where the deficit is at right now and our revenue streams in the very near short term, I think that the minister has got to be rather careful, in the sense that you don't want a repeat of history happening. Whenever there's times of plenty coming into the economy, as there are now, how long that is going to last is yet to be seen. Political patronage tends to trump economic expediency. In the past, whenever we had all these substantial oil and gas gains, energy gains, we would have tended to focus quite a lot on spending on various transfers and subsidies, spending on programs that are not giving the economy such a high rate of return, as opposed to areas that would give you a much more healthier high rate of return, in this case, capital expenditure. I see in this budget, the minister has actually doubled capital expenditure from what it was back in 2020, which I think was a very positive thing. But I just want to caution that when I looked at the capital expenditure projects outlined in the budget and the PSIP, the major ones, that is, much of it was actually repeated from there since 2016, 2017, more so the highway projects, the Moruga port, from 2018, the Togo port, etc., etc. So I want to caution that when you have, even though it's the most productive area of government expenditure, which is capital expenditure, I just want to caution that they have to be careful this rounds, in that they want to finish these projects, start it and finish it as quickly as possible. The longer they are there on the books, the more costly they become as they roll over year after year. The more opportunity exists for issues like corruption, especially given that we still haven't finalized stringent procurement policies in the country. Now, one thing I was happy that he mentioned, that he spoke about, I want to start off more on a positive note, and then we can get to the issue of the fuel subsidy. I'm glad he spoke about manufacturing, because I have been following the manufacturing sector for the past year and a half fairly closely, liaising, of course, with the Exim Bank. And I have to say, they've done a fantastic job, considering the impediments and the obstacles that they face on an ongoing basis in the economy in terms of the ease of doing business. I think they are the sector that we should really be trying to emulate, because when economies reopened across the world and there was a surge in international spending, local manufacturers stepped up. They took advantage of this with some assistance, of course, from the Exim Bank, and ramped up their production levels and, of course, their export levels, despite facing obstacles of high prices of raw materials, high prices of equipment, etc., from international suppliers, and, of course, problems that they would face on an ongoing basis to access these and to clear them quickly at the port. When I look at the data, right, the total overall manufacturing sector, I think it's important not to compare it from 2021 till now, because 2021, we were still in the height of the pandemic. So the circumstances in the economy were vastly different. I think it's important to compare it in the pre-pandemic period, the immediate pre-pandemic period. So from the first quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of this year, manufacturing actually grew by about 4%. And that includes the manufacturing activities that it comprises of petrochemicals and of course, the non-refining and petrochemicals activities. So when you factor out petrochemicals and refining, the non-petrochemical manufacturing actually grew by about 18%. Now that is a significant amount of growth. And the real hero in that particular story are the food processors. Those are involved in food processing and beverages, etc. They would have grown by 33%. Unfortunately, in that same period, the petrochemical sector would have fallen by, or declined by about 22%. Of course, given the declines in our and more so in the gas production, the gas production area of things. But the food processors are really the ones that capitalize on the excess demand coming out of the rest of the global economy, increase their production levels, and as the minister would have in fact indicated, their exports alone in 2021 would have been in the vicinity of about 10.1 billion. Part of these exports were also sales from other Caribbean countries when they opened up their borders and started allowing tourists back in the countries. Of course, hoteliers would have required, would have purchased our local food products that are processed here in Trinidad and Tobago to restock their restaurants and their dining services. So I really think at the end of the day, despite the burdens that the manufacturing sector have faced, they really came out on top this time.
You mentioned the government being prudent, and you mentioned times aplenty. The times aplenty now as a result, of course, of the buoyant energy commodity prices because of the Russia-Ukraine war and, generally increased demand. We're going into a winter season, which also will mean more demand.
Get into that a bit as well. Yeah,
which could mean price hikes. Not necessarily because we have increased output as a country. Well, you just spoke about the manufacturing sector, which through processing has done better. What has the minister, when you disaggregated the numbers and the deficit, which according to his budget is shrinking, which the government promised 57 or so billion, a little 57 more billion expenditure, 56 billion revenue expected. Question one, do you think the revenue projections are reasonable? And two, what is critical now? You mentioned prudent management of the economy and not spending a lot when you're making a little more. Question two, do you think the possible public sector debt increasing with the 4%, if that's accepted, has been factored into that deficit? And what is critical at this point moving forward?
So so first of all, I want to just get into the issue of the energy prices and, of course, what the budget has been predicated on. Right now, the energy prices, as we're seeing here, is very, very, very volatile. Yes, of course, they're quite high, given more so the war in Russia and Ukraine. So important to remember that they started rising even before the war, given that economies had opened up and economic activities across the world started to increase. Now, our price, as you know, is closer usually to Brent. Now, at the end of May, Brent was $122 per barrel. And it's dropped to about $96.55 in the end of August. And when I checked it earlier this morning, it was about $84, somewhere in that vicinity. $84.90, somewhere in that vicinity. So that's a lot of variation when you look at where the prices are at. And now our budget is predicated on an oil price that is of about $92.50. Now, despite the international agencies indicating high oil prices for next year. One, we have to consider when those agencies would have forecasted those prices, because it really makes no sense that we're using figures that were forecasted weeks to several months ago. We should use very, very updated prices to set our forecasts and consider what's happening in the international domain. Right now in the international domain, central banks all across the world would have would have increased their interest rates. I mean, just last week alone, the Federal Reserve, I think the fifth time for the year, they increased their reserve rate by about 75 basis points. And the very day after, on Thursday, the UK, the Bank of England would have increased their rates by about 50 basis points. So it's natural that when you have this nature of increasing interest rates, the global economy is going to start to slow down, and it already has started slowing down. We've seen that the pace of growth in merchandise trading and merchandise shipping has in fact started to slow down for quite some time right now. And like those two countries that I mentioned, they aren't the only ones that increase their interest rates. You have close to 50 countries already for this year have raised their rates. So that makes it, of course, more expensive for businesses to borrow, to invest in their companies and their activities, etc. And at the same time, when the US increases their interest rates, it makes the US dollar much stronger. And on a side note, we have to count our lucky stars that we are pegged to the US dollar, and we haven't gone in an actual fully floating regime where we would have in fact this round's been our currency would have depreciated against the US dollar. So that's actually a good thing, because if that had happened, we'd be paying more to import fuel now, right? So, but that's just a side note. So given that the US dollar has by far strengthened relative to other currencies, the demand for oil globally has started to fall, and in that respect, that would have caused the oil price to fall also. So I think predicating this price on $92.50, to me, that is a little optimistic at this stage. What could go in our favor, though, is that in terms of the oil price, is that by the end of the year, there's an embargo right now sanctioned from the EU, the United Nations, the European Union, for Russian oil, on the purchase of Russian oil, and that embargo is supposed to be fully in place by the end of December this year. That could put upward pressure on the oil price internationally. However, as you know, Russia is selling oil to China, to Asian countries, and they're selling it at a very, very discounted price. So again, that could counteract some of the effects of the embargo and push the global price downwards. So at this stage, the story is extremely volatile. I think it could go either way, but me personally, I don't see it being at the very high levels that the international agency.
So what do you think about the revenue projections based on what you've said there?
Right. So, no, that's where gas comes in. Remember, typically speaking, gas and oil tend to be highly correlated in terms of their prices. But in Europe, there's a tendency, there's a strong movement away from oil and oil-based commodities into gas-based commodities, more so LNG. As you see, Germany, they're switching. They're doing their very best to switch more to LNG because it's a cleaner fuel, and of course because they're simply not getting the gas. Europe is just not getting the gas from Russia. Europe will usually get about 40% of their gas from Russia. Now, out of the gas that they typically get, they're only getting about 10% of that, because far less so because of the decline in supplies due to the shutdown of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. There's one of the major pipelines that provides gas to Europe from Russia. So, in that respect, that in itself could benefit us once the energy companies are selling our commodities, our products to Europe. As you know, we have a transfer pricing problem here. Which we have to, of course, put our foot down at some point in time and develop some very stringent legislations to prevent that. Because what is to stop them at some point in time from selling the commodities to other subsidiaries of the energy companies in other countries at a far discounted price, and we don't get the best bang for our buck. So that is another one that we have to consider. One of the factors also, I think, or I would actually suspect that why the minister would have set such a such an oil price or predicated the budget on this high oil price is because of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Remember, the rules for the HSF is that once your petroleum revenues are at least 10% or higher than 10% of the budgeted petroleum revenues for any quarter, you have to deposit the excess into the HSF, into the fund. And of course, if it's less than 10%, but once it's excess, he has the discretion. It's up to him really to put that excess funds into the account. And for the year, they should deposit at least 60% of the overall excess revenues into the HSF account. That's what the legislation says. Now, with such a high oil price, if it remains close to the vicinity of 92.50 or a little bit higher or even lower, then naturally he wouldn't have to put money into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund based on that price. The monies that are coming in, he could actually spend it on whatever budgetary allocations he would have set in the budget. So that's another thing to pay attention to.
That's an interesting perspective you just raised here, because I was about to ask, why would he have...
Just one quick comment though before you get to that. Of course, as a caveat, it means that once the oil price were to drop, and especially if it were to drop, let's say in the 80s, I would say in the early 80s or the 70s, etc., which personally, of course, I hope it doesn't, then that means the fiscal deficit is going to be higher. Yeah. I think the projections right now are very healthy in terms of the fiscal accounts. Notwithstanding the fact that a budget is really also supposed to be, and more importantly, in my view, a strategy for improving our economic welfare and improving and enhancing activities in the business community. But notwithstanding that, the fiscal accounts are looking very attractive, and I sincerely hope it stays that way.
Yeah. Would this have been the highest budgeted oil price that we would have had for the last maybe 6 or 7 budgets?
Yeah, I believe so. I would have to check that back, but I certainly think so, especially given where oil prices were at since 2016, how low they were. It certainly would have been, in my view, but I need to check that back.
All right, I appreciate it.
Dr. Arjoon, I know when we spoke to several people, they in terms of the post-budget analysis, they said some of them referred to it as a holding budget, that they didn't see enough, in their opinion, of how the government, what is the government's strategy in terms of economic plan moving the country forward to get to growth. They felt it was merely holding the place at this point because we have this extra revenue coming in from the commodities in the energy sector, and it was a holding budget. Are you in agreement with that assessment, or do you think that there were signals in it that indicate where the government is going in terms of the economic transformation of the country?
No, I think really it's more of a continuation of what exists right now. There's nothing really new in this budget to suggest that there's going to be a certain new avenues then that are going to build productive capacity, engender productive jobs, etc., and our increase our export levels, etc., especially outside of energy. And in fact, in the energy domain, gas production is still likely to be very, very low. And I just want to touch on that a bit because you notice in the budget that he did speak about adjusting the fiscal state of the energy sector. He would have adjusted the PPT. He would have reduced the petroleum profits tax from 35% to 30%, and he would have also made some adjustments to the SPT as well, the supplemental petroleum tax. Remember, the supplemental petroleum tax is only for oil; it's not levied for gas, at least not at this point in time. Now, while reducing the petroleum profits tax, I think is a good start, but I don't think he's as aggressive on the fiscal regime as he really ought to be. Now, I know this government has always been very, very critical of giving too much money away to the energy companies, and quite rightly so. However, when we look at the international domain, when countries like United Kingdom, for example, when they're giving off 140% back in capital expenditure rebates to energy companies, especially for the deep water exploration, 140%, and that is paid in 1 year. Here, when we give our capital expenditure rebates is usually, I think, in a straight line allocation method, allowance method of 20-20-20, when in the past it was 50% in 1 year, 30% in the second year, and 20% in the third year. So based on the principle of the time value of money, where companies want cash flows coming in as quickly as possible because the value of money drops with time, what is really to stop? When you look at the overall regime, theoretically, what is really going to stop the energy companies or stop them from limiting their activities here in favor of other jurisdictions where it's more investment attractive? So I felt, given the production environment where we're at right now, at under 3 billion SCF per day, I thought they should have been more aggressive with the regime, with whatever they're offering. Much of our reserves, as you know, are in deep water. To monetize this requires significant capital expenditure by the upstream producers. They, like every company in the private sector, they would have a specific required rate of return on their investment, especially into deep water exploration, right? Because that's a major investment decision. And of course, there are possibilities that in their exploration, they might stumble upon a dry hole or a few dry holes. So the return has to compensate for the risk being taken. And I don't think a 5% reduction is likely to be adequate. What they really ought to do, I mean, I would be inclined to think they should have done this by now, but I mean, I can't be sure because I obviously wasn't there. None of us were. Is that you need to sit with the upstreamers and find out what is the rate of return that they require to bring gas production up to 4 billion standard cubic feet of gas, 4 billion SCF per day, which is going to help us to adequately meet the demands of our downstreamers, and at the same time allow the trains, the 3 remaining trains at Atlantic LNG, to operate at near full capacity. I mean, when we consider where LNG prices are at in Europe right now, where the demand is to LNG right now in Europe, it's probably the highest we've ever seen in our history. And had Train 1 been operational, had our production of LNG been healthier, then we could have capitalized on these opportunities for revenue generation much more. Well, coming back to that issue of the nature of the budget, it being just a stagnant one, it being one that is progressive, I think from certain perspectives, it has certainly made the cost of living, made the ability to function financially on a daily basis much more difficult. In fact, given that I serve also on the board of the Chaguanas Chamber, every fortnight I tend to take a walk down Chaguanas Main Road, would go to the market area, speak to some of the farmers there, speak to the shopkeepers in the various malls, speak to people on the streets as well, just to get a feel. Because in my view, even as an economist, the best data you can get is going face to face with the people on the ground. And to me, that's even better than data from the CSO and IMF in certain respects. Now, a lot of them, if not all of them, were very concerned about the possible cap that was placed on the fuel subsidy and what's going to happen with the oil price, etc., given the fact that their cost of living is the highest it's been for generations. Now, look at it from the perspective of a private sector entity, especially a manufacturer or an importer. Already, manufacturers, those involved in the industrial sector, those involved in agriculture, they're the ones that are going to face the highest brunt of the increase in the fuel prices at the pump, right? And of course, that means the consumer at the end of the day is going to have to pay a higher price for their commodity. Consumers, of course, householders, they're going to pay. So they're going to face higher prices, one, when they go to shop outside in retail outlets and in the supermarkets, etc. And two, they're also going to face higher prices because they're commuting every day. When you look at the degree of people, of cars that have to commute from Chaguanas or Central Trinidad to Port of Spain, from San Fernando or South Trinidad into Port of Spain, it's a significant amount, and it's been this way for years. And I have to wonder if COVID-19 taught us anything, that working from home or decentralization.
Put a pin there, Dr. Arjoon, because that's a different conversation we're going to get into in a while. The Prime Minister's comments yesterday about the indisciplined public service and the lack of infrastructure. Let's welcome Karen Nunes Teixeira, former Finance Minister, to our conversation. Good morning, Mrs. Teixeira.
Senator Richards.
I'm just Paul here.
Okay, well, I'm just Karen here, and good morning to the rest of your panel and, of course, your listeners. You know,
Thanks for joining
I'm
us.
time crunched, as I indicated
Yeah.
previously, so that I do have
Other commitments. All right, let's just get your overall initial impressions of the budget. We're going to have the conversation with both of you at the same time. We understand both of you are time constrained.
Yes, I think well, I came in a little late to hear what Vaalmikki Arjoon, Dr. Arjoon had to say in regards to the budget. I think more or less in a very broad brush, I think it would be correct to say that the 4 hours and 5 minutes could have been cut down by half. It was a lot of lack of structure. It was a lot of all over the place, and an inordinate amount of time spent on trying to convince the public that they have it right with the production for natural gas. I think that's what they are very, very concerned about, because as we all well know, we're still an energy economy, and is a combination, the factors for the revenue are price and production. And the production has definitely fallen consistently over the last 4 or 5 years. And I don't have to prosecute the whole thing about the failure of the deep water round and whatever else is going on. And I understood what Dr. Arjoon was saying when he spoke about the incentive for the deep water round is just not enough. The supplemental petroleum tax has been increased for onshore as well as shallow bids. But one has to take into account, maybe I'm just being a realist, is that the investors in all of the trains, 2, 3, 4, as well as in the natural gas, are foreign investors. They are Shell, they are BPTT, and they owe their primary responsibility to their investors. And until the sharp increase in prices with the Ukraine war and all the other factors that played into it, I think they were given the clear signals that they were getting ready to pack up fairly quickly because of pressures from their shareholders and from themselves to get to renewable energy. And I think that pressure is mounting. You see the price of oil slowly not slowly, but it's dropping every day, which is why I couldn't understand how the minister got to $92. I know he used a lot of the factors, but he knows that every day when you're looking at oil and gas prices can change, and it is in a downward trajectory in terms of prices for oil. When it comes to gas, I think $6 is a fairly reasonable price. We just had that whole blow up with Russia, as they're saying it was not deliberate, but that's another story. But LNG really is front and center because it frees them up from having to rely on the gas pipelines and getting their gas from the LNG, but that takes time to build out a port and to build out the ships. So what I would say in essence, that one, the HSF, no wonder he didn't want to speak about it. All he quickly said, 1.1 billion TT was deposited, but then he doesn't tell you that the HSF has dropped from over 5 point something billion last year to about 12.5% drop. He doesn't want to tell you that because he's always boasted, yes, we've taken on money, but guess what? The HSF has remained strong and resilient and so on. A little to say about that.
Wasn't that fact in the pre-budget papers that were submitted, Ms. Shera?
It may have been in the pre-budget papers that you would have been submitted, but if you spend 4 hours and 5 minutes speaking to a public on what you're going to do with the budget and spend an inordinate amount of time trying to explain your government's lack of performance on COVID. I don't think COVID was around in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And in fact, I did see use real GDP this time around. But when I looked at, the mere Motley, it seems to be the bugbear of politicians in Trinidad. But when you look at their real GDP, which he did use rather than nominal, you will see that both in Barbados, Eastern Caribbean, and Jamaica, they have gone back to positive from a negative position just at the same time as the rest of us, except for Guyana, we're experiencing negative growth. And it's actually reached 10.4. Yes, the inflation rate is much higher all over in US, UK, in Barbados, I think it's about 10%. But you have to see what the drivers are. For us, our inflation rate is low, but what your Dr. Arjoon was indicating is the living wage What are people going to do? Value of their money.
I'm glad you mentioned that. This question is to both of you, starting with Dr. Arjoon and then to Mrs. Teixeira.
Yes, and I will have to.
The public will not be wading through the minutiae of the budget, the economics. The public is looking at, before the budget is read, food prices are skyrocketing. Their wages are stationary. In some instances, their wages are gone because they've lost their jobs or they are underemployed because production has cut back in some sectors. What does this budget mean for the man in the street, starting with Dr. Arjoon? What can they expect in the next 2 quarters? And then Mrs. Teixeira.
All right. So let me break this down from a business standpoint, because of course the business, from at the end of the day, the consumer is the one that actually has to pay the price for whatever cost is incurred by the business community. Yeah. So you have importers. Much of the businesses here are import intensive, and they're already paying a higher cost to import from their suppliers. Prices internationally are much higher. They're already paying higher shipping costs. So in that respect, when your cost insurance and freight value is higher, you're going to end up paying higher VAT and duties. So that in itself already is a substantially increased cost for the business community. But in addition to that, when they have to pay for hauling activities, delivery from the port to their business compound, they are now going to incur, and they have been incurring higher prices since April, and they're going to now incur even further higher prices just for that transportation, just for those hauling services. Of course, at the end of the day, that is going to be passed on to the consumer. There's a vulnerable segment in society that would have needed more help from the states, and I was just briefly looking through the SSIP document, the social services investment document, and I saw that things like the food card program, the expenditure for that is actually lower than where it was last year. I thought at least he should have kept it in the vicinity of where it was last year, because food prices are the highest they've ever been, and the degree of vulnerability in the country is higher than where it was back in 2019. So I felt as though it should have been at least in the vicinity of what they were spending on the food card program last year, and also the school feeding program, etc. I felt that in the past he mentioned the possibility of having like a fuel cash card or utility cash cards, etc. I was hoping to see that, because at the end of the day, you have to protect the vulnerable. And that, in my view, has not been done. In fact, has been worsened because of the increase in the cost of fuel. In fact, I'll mention this, speaking to some people, even before the budget, given the high cost of fuel that some persons in rural areas are experiencing. And what was happening is that because school has started back, many of them are finding it very difficult to get their kids to school. And in terms of public transportation, some of them are paying as much as $25 to $30 per child per day for public transportation just to get that child to school. And in fact, a few of them have been telling me after the budget that it seems that some of the taxis don't want to come into the rural areas to pick up the kids just in front of their homes. They have to walk out the road, which is a bit of a distance. And that in itself is taking a lot of time, causing their kids to reach the school late. And some were even joking, well, just now, but it might very well be a joke. Just now, they had to start back walking to school like my parents would have done many decades ago. So, and these are real issues, these are real possibilities because of how high the cost of living is. I don't know if I have time for this, but I would love to share some data with you all, because I did a little small survey.
Just put a pin and let Mr. Teixeira respond on the issue of the impact on the everyday citizen.
Yes, well, I think what we've really been doing and what understandably is looking at what's wrong. So I think we have to try to find out what can we do to make it right. And it's not going to happen by waving a magic wand. But if I look at the UK, for example, which has a inflation rate of 10-point-something%, which it's being driven by food and energy prices, what the current chancellor is trying to push then is to push growth. And I think what the government needs to, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's going to be a positive for the country. And I think a lot of the persons who fall into the so-called lower income, which are the ones that we should encourage to become micro entrepreneurs. And I saw very little mention about them. And I don't think people recognize that a micro entrepreneur can be employ as many as 25 people and grows 5 million a year. I think there are a lot of chow kings who don't come into that vicinity, and it was not mentioned. So if I were to give any sort of advice to the government, the inflation rate is being driven a lot by food, but look at our food import bill, 80%, it has gone up even more. And there's a lot of food that is being imported, as we well know, by the major food suppliers that are quite unnecessary. I'm not talking about cereal, but do we have to have 10 versions of oil? Do we have to have 10 versions of coffee? Do we have to have all these franchises in this country that are low paying? No, we don't. And a lot of that money can be put into, a lot of that money that's being spent on low paying, dead end jobs, in which the beneficiaries are certainly at the top percent of our economy, which is really counter to what a government's responsibility is. And what the government should be looking more at is the Gini coefficient, which tells you the spread, the economic inequality in the country, because all of the international organizations will tell you it is not poverty that is really the issue, it is income inequality. And I think that the government has not prepared to deal with that, and dealing with it by using subsidies as the panacea cannot continue, because it continues to draw down on our revenues. It continues to leave them in a place of a hopelessness, and building more HCC houses, which you cannot take to the bank to borrow any money because it does not constitute collateral, is not helpful. So the government has to take a quasi-Keynesian approach, as they're doing in England, as they've done in America when they needed to do it, even with their stimulus check. And what they need to do is pull these people out of there, those that you can, make them micro entrepreneurs. And one area is the agro industry, so that we can reduce our 5.7 billion import of food, which if you go into the supermarket association, has said that 85% of the food they find in our supermarkets are imported. And even those that are not imported, let me just say this, because I am going to run out of time, and I do want to make the point that even his reluctance to devalue the dollar has a lot to do with the fact that the so-called manufacturing sector imports nearly everything that they use to so-called make anything. And if you look at the figures, the only areas that made money, in fact, nearly every part of the non-energy sector had losses of all 49, 56%. It was food and beverage and tobacco. Well, I don't know that we grow tobacco and all that red beans and lentils and black beans, and they put into tins. Those tins are brought in as are the products into which they're put in. So I think the government needs to focus on the micro entrepreneur and create growth poles so that they can reduce over time the impact of inflation, which is really the purchasing power of your dollar. Just one thing, Lebanon, just yesterday, they said people were literally holding up the banks to get their savings because their purchasing power, their salaries, which is $800 to the US dollar, because of the 95% devaluation in their currency and their whole import situation, their money is worth $30. So we don't want to go there. We want to grow the economy. We want to help those who are on subsidies to become entrepreneurs. And it's going to take time, but we need to do that. And of course, deal with crime, which is a big barrier to our achieving any of our objectives. And finally,
Mr. Chair, before you go,
you will have the stage.
It's a question I want to pose.
Let me just make a very broad thing, and I will answer. And the overall problem with this government, which is proven, it has earned the lack of trust and confidence in it, with the train one, with the AV drilling, with the barrier, with the lack of implementation year after year after year after year. So if people do not believe what the minister said on Monday in his 4 hours and 5 minutes speech, a regurgitation of things he has been saying for the last 7 years and giving datelines so when things are happening, if people don't have any confidence in it, and confidence is the key to an economy thing. So that's my overall
right. Point. So Paul would have asked both of our guests, what impact the budget would have had on the small man. My question to both of you all, and you can go first, Mrs. Teixeira, as a former finance minister, is there anything at all you agree with in the budget? Anything at all?
I agree that the you're really giving me a tough question, because I understand why the government has to put a cap on the fuel subsidy. I'm not sure they've thought out that thing with diesel well, because when I look back at the figures, he may be saying he's put in 50 cents. You know, that's the kind of thing he does, because up to 2016 it was 150 or something. Now it's gone to 441. So and then this idea of the $500 you're giving people to do what with? Saying that they're going to have more money to be able to have disposable income to have the economy to fast track. No, it's poor people to be able to pay their to pay for food.
But you're still criticizing.
I have a lot of problems. Because I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to be fair, and I started by saying, Wendell, and I think that is the consensus across the board, regardless, is that the lack of implementation of this government, the number of broken promises by this government, and the lack of confidence and trust in what they say. Every single year, this Minister of Finance gets the numbers on the energy prices wrong. And I still think he got it wrong. Even though he went at length to show why he should do it, you are seeing the prices of oil dropping, and yet he put it at 92. When I was in government, what I understood is you took a very conservative approach, because the mid-year review allowed you the space to make adjustment. He wants his revenue to look good, as he always wants it to look good, so the fiscal deficit does not look that bad. And I think that
Vaalmikki, do you agree? Do you trust the numbers the minister is presenting?
No, but you can't, because the best predictor.
I'm asking Vaalmikki though.
It's okay. So I have to go though.
Earlier part of our conversation, we spoke about that.
Thanks, Mrs. Teixeira.
Thank you very much, Wendell.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes, Vaalmikki. Mrs. Teixeira said that the minister's numbers have not been credible over many years. Do you agree with that?
Well, his forecasts in terms of energy production and pricing has never been really accurate. So yeah, in that respect, I certainly do agree. As we spoke of earlier, I think he has really pegged the budget on an oil price that is too high, given where oil prices are at right now. The only thing, in my view, that could really cause oil prices to remain in that vicinity is what happens when there's a European Union embargo coming into full effect in December. But then again, that could be mitigated when, if and when Asia continues to buy oil from Russia at a severely discounted price, and if other countries decide to step in the picture too and buy their oil instead of what's available in the rest of the world. So that's one key factor to consider. Now, the gist of our conversation so far, and based on also what Mr. Teixeira has been talking about, confidence in the business community, and you know, I have a partial for the SME community from ever since, and I don't really think anything at all was offered as a catalyst, a continued catalyst, then to push the SME community forward. Far less the overall business community, but I just want to focus on the SME community here. We've had, since the pandemic started, the SME loan facility from the commercial banks, partnering with the government, and I was really hoping to find out from the numbers from the government as to what or how many persons or entities would have benefited from this, and from that program, how many entities were managed to become registered so they're no longer operating in the parallel economy, no longer dodging their taxes, etc. They became registered so they could take advantage of this. But up to now, we don't really have that data. I remember some time ago, he said it was very successful. But when you speak to bankers, senior bankers, they're telling you a very different story. So I really wanted to hear information about that. What I think, however, we need to do for the SMEs in the country, their biggest problem is financing. At the end of the day, financing in terms of US dollars. Yes, the Exim Bank has helped a lot of companies, but those are primarily manufacturers. Outside of the manufacturing base, you have a significant need for foreign exchange among the SME community. I think what needs to happen is that we need to set up what is known as a fiduciary fund for SMEs here. Now, what that entails is where the multilaterals will provide funding. They set up this fund in US dollars for these SMEs. And so that fiduciary fund that owns these US dollars will then not lend these SMEs US dollars, but they will purchase a stake in the SME in the company. So that stake could be a minority stake of course is about maybe 10% or 20%, whatever the case is, up to the discretion of the SME owner. And so therefore the fund itself is purchasing ownership in that company, paying in US dollars, which is therefore giving them a stock of US in which they can use to expand the scope of their operations or whatever the case may be. That to me is a significant step in assisting the private sector in boosting their operation, particularly the SME community. And another thing, the minister spoke at length about digitization. Now, I agree 100% with the digitization thrust and a fintech thrust, especially since we are light years behind other countries in terms of fintech. I mean, Jamaica and the Bahamas, they already have a central bank digital currency. I think it's called Jandex in Jamaica, and the Sand Dollar in the Bahamas. And a digital currency can do a lot to mitigate financial fraud, money laundering, and the list goes on and on. I'm surprised that
Dr. Arjoon, I think we have to stop with the news. And I hope you have more time to just continue just a 3-minute newscast. So can you hold?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions, Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services, great mechanics and technicians, exceptional customer service with accessories galore. Champlain Auto Services is your one-stop shop. They are your Auto Champions. You name it, they can fix it. Champlain Auto Services, Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Call 662-6545 and like us on Facebook. Champlain Auto Services. We do it all.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
The financial position of the country is not where it should be. This is according to Vaalmikki Arjoon, finance lecturer at the UWI. Speaking on the Power Breakfast Show on Power 102 Digital this morning, he said given where the deficit is right now, the minister has to be careful with repeating history and has to ask himself how long will the money coming in last. He said the minister has doubled capital expenditure, which is a positive thing since it is the most productive area of government expenditure. However, he cautioned the government to complete projects in the shortest possible time. The finance minister predicated the 2022-2023 budget on an oil price of US $92.50 per barrel, a natural gas price of US $6 per MMBTU. Vaalmikki noted energy prices are very volatile. He said despite international agencies predicting high prices next year, one has to consider when their predictions were set, maintaining that it's best to use the most recent predictions. He said the demand for oil globally has started to fall, therefore predicating such a high price for the budget is a bit optimistic. He noted an embargo due on Russian oil could also have a negative effect. Former minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mariano Brown, has described the 2022-2023 budget as a holding budget. He told Power 102 Digital that the budget left several issues unanswered with just some pacifying measures put in place. He added that one of his biggest takeaways from the budget is the government's firm stance on salary increases. He said the government has seemingly set a marker and has indicated that it will not offer more than it has to trade unions, which was emphasized by the stance taken at the weekend regarding tutor. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is being slammed online for saying the country's public service does not have the infrastructure or the discipline to work from home. He made the comments while speaking at a post-budget press conference in Parliament on Monday. Commenting on the increase in fuel prices, Dr. Rowley suggested that a change in driving habits could reduce fuel consumption. However, when asked if the public sector would therefore be considering work-from-home options, he suggested that public servants lacked both the discipline and necessary infrastructure to do so effectively. Two men held in connection with last week's deadly Pennywise robbery have appeared in court charged with possession of arms and ammunition, including 2 assault rifles, for the purpose of trafficking. Christopher Noriega and Brent Walcott appeared before Senior Magistrate Amina Dionorain in the San Fernando Charge Court. The men were denied bail as police wanted an opportunity to do a fingerprint trace to determine if they had criminal records. They will reappear in court today. And to news coming to out of the U.S., millions of Florida residents are bracing for life-threatening storm surges, catastrophic winds, and flooding as the hurricane racing towards its shores intensifies to a Category 4. Hurricane Ian, which has already thrashed western Cuba, will reach Florida later on Wednesday. The National Hurricane Center said that the storm, with maximum sustained winds rising to near 250 kilometers per hour, is rapidly intensifying. It is due to hit the Tampa Bay region. The area is among the most vulnerable places in the U.S. for severe flooding, and if Ian continues on its expected path, this would be the region's first direct hit by a major hurricane since 1921. Well, that was your news update at 8 o'clock. Look out for news in full coming up at 12 noon.
Up to date and credible. Power 102 Digital.
It's hot, hot, hot. Furniture Plus September mattress sale is sizzling. Get therapeutic mattresses starting from just $999, plus free gifts when you buy select Serta and Sealy mattresses. Available with cash and higher purchase plans. Check press and social media for details. Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions. Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services. Great mechanics and technicians. Exceptional customer service with accessories galore. Champlain Auto Services is your one-stop shop. They are your Auto Champions. You name it, they can fix it. Champlain Auto Services. Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Call 662-6545 and like us on Facebook. Champlain Auto Services. We do it all.
Every Sunday, enjoy brunch at the Cascadia Hotel for an introductory price of only $99. Brunch time runs from 10:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Kids 5 and under, accompanied by an adult, eat for free. So bring the entire family and enjoy in this delicious feast every Sunday at the Cascadia Hotel. Don't miss out. Call 235-4554 and make your reservation now. Brunch at the Cascadia Hotel for an introductory price of only $99. Special conditions apply.
All right, 8 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock. Thank you so much, Champlain Auto Services, for powering our 8 o'clock news brief. All right, gentlemen, so we're back. Of course, Dr. Vaalmikki Arjoon is still with us, and we are expecting Mr. Vasant Bharat to join us, and there he is. So good morning to Vasant as well.
Hi, good morning, Steve. Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Vaalmikki.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Just before we head to Vasant, thank you for joining us, Vasant. Vaalmikki, Dr. Arjoon, you started to the presentation of some data that you wanted to underscore point. If you could continue in that train, please.
Oh, I was speaking about the digitization.
Yeah.
So the digitization, and I noticed he in the budget he went a bit speaking about that. Strange thing though is that the achievements that he said that they would have that have been there are some of them have actually been there for a few years now. Like for example, the Bureau of Standards, where you can pay your customs declarations online or using debit or credit cards. That's actually been there since 2019. What I did find strange is that a few budgets ago, the minister spoke about implementing at customs the multiple electronic funds transfer window that is going to allow those who are importers to be able to pay all their duties and import charges electronically online, so that you don't have to go and line up at a customs cashier in order to pay to clear your goods. In fact, what's happening for several months now is that you don't have adequate customs cashiers present at the port. So what may happen is that your broker might have to go to another bond, and if he's lucky, he may get to pay there. So all of these things add up and cause the importer to pay rent, additional rent charges, demurrage, etc. at the port, and of course drives up his costs of doing business. I think by now, given that countries in the region, Jamaica, again, they've implemented this electronic funds transfer window where you can make 100% of payments to the government, to the state sector, to state agencies, etc. 100% of it can be done online. Countries like Zambia, they've been doing it since I think 2016, 2017. So we have the technology here already. That's a strange thing. I don't know. I can't imagine what is keeping us back from implementing this, because these issues sound smaller, but they affect thousands of people, thousands of importers.
But they don't sound small, and this is a good cue to bring Vasant Bharat into the conversation because he is
excuse me, folks. I actually have another interview that I should have been at 20 minutes ago.
Dr. Arjoon, thank you so much. We appreciate your contribution this morning.
Thank you for spending the time with us. All the best to you, Dr. Arjoon.
Okay.
Vasant, the expression on your face speaks volumes to me because it's like, I from the expression on your face, it's like a deja vu. You know, it's the same conversations over and over as a former Minister of Trade and Industry and holding several other significant high cabinet portfolios. What does it feel like to you to hear us, these promises or these projections about critical elements of our development being made, and we have this implementation deficit impacting our ease of doing business and the general development of Trinidad and Tobago?
Morning, Paul. Morning, Steve. Morning to all of you. Now, you're right. I feel a sense of deja vu, but I also feel there's a sense of tragedy in all of this, because all the past, other governments can be blamed for a lack of implementation or not implementing as they had promised. I think that the circumstances in which we find ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the world, of course, but obviously we're always going to be positioning ourselves, and we're always going to be positioning ourselves against the rest of the world in terms of how we compete with the rest of the world, how we accelerate our growth, how we improve the quality of lives of our people, how we improve our social circumstances. So whether you like it or not, there's always going to be that inbuilt competition for resources, whether it's our human resources, keeping them here or letting them leave the shores and go elsewhere to contribute to the lives and economies of our countries, or whether it's financial resources that are available worldwide that would assist us in terms of grant funding or loan funding. We are always competing with the rest of the world. The position in which we find ourselves today is even more critical because, of course, coming out of COVID, there is a significant deterioration in public finances in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would have liked to have seen the Minister of Finance, and I think it was imperative for the Minister of Finance, not what I would have liked to have seen. It is imperative for whoever is holding the reins at this point in time, we've created the conditions for what I would call robust, resilient, and inclusive. And that's the important part, inclusive growth for Trinidad and Tobago. I think as a country, we keep missing the mark a long way every time we read a budget, because a budget can no longer be a balancing of the books or an accounting bookkeeping exercise. It has to do two things. It has to address the social and economic position of the citizens of the country.
Vasant, one sec. I'm going to turn off my camera because we seem to have a bandwidth problem. Yeah. And I want to hear what you're saying clearly. So you can continue the conversation, but I'm going to just turn off my camera. So don't be shocked if you see.
I know he getting a little feed problem. So I'll take off mine.
So go ahead, please.
Yeah. A budget can no longer be a situation of just balancing the books or of it being a pure bookkeeping exercise. Because a budget in today's world has to take into account the social implications of people's current circumstances, their social and economic situation, as well as charting a course that the population can buy into and become a part of for the future, for the development of themselves, their future circumstances, and the opportunities it gives to their children in the future to continue to want to live and stay in Trinidad and Tobago. And we continue to miss the point. I don't know whether it is just sheer incompetence. I don't know if it is deliberate that you need to keep people waiting in hope. I don't know what it is, but the reality is it is not good for the country. And what we have here is a pressure cooker type situation that's building in the country. And I don't think this minister cares, quite frankly. I really don't think he does. And I say that based on what I've seen over the last 6 years and his attitude and his level of arrogance and the way he deals with people. I don't think he really cares. And that is when I started off, I said, this is an absolute tragedy for Trinidad and Tobago, because this budget will do very little to improve the quality of lives of people in any meaningful way. And our reality is that the rest of the world is moving ahead. And we're not just staying stagnant, we are actually regressing in a whole scheme of things. And as we develop the conversation, I'll tell you why I'm saying those things.
Now, you had been part of government's, what's the Roadmap to Recovery team.
Yes.
Having contributed greatly to that. And that part, and correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the intention of putting together that team of persons, not only from within the government, because you form part of another government, which was, to me, a great move, looking at the people who the government thought could make a contribution, regardless of so-called political affiliation. And part, part of the mandate of that was not only to look at the way through COVID, but look at the way to position the country post-COVID in a more strategic manner. Would that be correct?
Absolutely correct.
So, does this budget fall in alignment with what you know came out of those discussions and that document or that exercise?
Well, it's not just this budget. There was a budget read last year, post the Roadmap Committee's recommendations. I would say, Paul, I would be hard-pressed to find any of the recommendations that were made in any of the areas, whether it's agriculture, whether it's construction, finance, social development. I would find it extremely difficult or hard-pressed to say that very much, in fact, very little has been implemented or has been recommended for implementation over the last 2 years. So the answer, the brief answer is no, not very little, not very much has actually been implemented or even promoted as being implementable in the near future.
So is that part of the tragedy you described earlier on? You bring to what I consider great minds together. You had an economic advisory commission led by one of the most preeminent economist thinkers in the country, Dr. Farrell. He walks out, I'm presuming, due to frustration, because, of course, what's the point if you have me on board and I'm advising you and nothing is being implemented or little is being implemented? And if what was being implemented was moving us in the direction that people could feel optimistic, have confidence, that's one thing. But there is a general sense of apathy, my perception, a general sense of wavering hopelessness in many instances, and a real pressure cooker situation. I agree with that fully, developing in society that maybe is not being perceived by the government.
I'll come back to what I said earlier on. It would be unfathomable that the government does not perceive it, because I'm sure the members of parliament on the government bench will be hearing it from their constituents on a daily basis. And I'm sure that members of parliament and ministers of government listen to talk shows and listen to the sentiment being expressed by citizens across the country. I come back to the fact that I truly do not believe that the Minister of Finance cares one way or the other. You don't have to hypothesize as to why Dr. Farrell left. He stated it openly that his recommendations were being ignored. So that in itself tells you...
But why would the Minister of Finance not care what political expediency? I don't understand why a sitting Minister of Finance who understands the implications politically and otherwise of what is being chorused from the society would not care. To me, it's anathema to the interests of the government and not only their supporters, but the country as a whole. Is it easy to dismiss everything that is not in alignment with their perspective as being just political rhetoric or opposition talk? Or is it that there is a genuine sentiment of discontent and hopelessness and pressure on the most vulnerable in society that has to be heard.
Well, I cannot believe that it's competence on the part of the minister, but certainly if you don't know what you're doing, then you must seek help. And in the instance where the Economic Advisory Board was appointed and genuine recommendations were being made, I mean, Dr. Farrell didn't resign after 3 months. I think a couple of years at least. So at least he attempted to get the job done. And it's only in frustration that he determined or made a determination that he was wasting his time. And so did everybody else on that advisory board. Everybody eventually resigned. So I generally don't think it's a situation that help is not available if help is sought. And I just honestly believe, having experienced the last 6 years of zero growth in Trinidad and Tobago, that the minister himself does not care to listen to anybody else but himself. And quite frankly, incompetence, and he is incompetent in this particular portfolio. He's ill-suited. I've said this from day one. The position of Ministry of Finance is a pivotal one in the development of growth, economic growth in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly at this juncture of our development. And he doesn't have the requisite skills. That's a fact. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. He doesn't have the expertise. He doesn't have the qualifications. He doesn't have the experience in this particular realm to be able to determine the future of Trinidad and Tobago. But worse, he's not willing, clearly, and evidence points to that. He's not willing to listen to those who may know better because he believes he knows everything. And that's our problem. That's where we are. I keep saying to people, if you have a heart problem, you're not going to go to the car mechanic down the road. You're going to seek the best possible heart surgeon that money can buy, that you can afford, and you're going to go to that person. Here we are when we have not sought out the best and the brightest to lead us through a very difficult position. And therein lies the problem. So therefore,
the Minister of Finance didn't appoint himself, and he doesn't.
No, absolutely.
He cannot continue to keep himself there if someone didn't think he was doing at least a credible job.
Well, fair enough. I'm just postulating to you that the buck obviously stops with the leader, but ultimately the person in position also has to understand his or her limitations and seek help if help is required.
One of the comments that recently has stirred the ire of the population in some quarters, because we had a kind of mixed poll this morning, and it was a comment from the Prime Minister that the public service is indisciplined and the country lacks the infrastructure for work from home situations, which is a wider conversation about productivity and its impact on development, including the transportation policy or lack thereof and grid in the country. And to me, it's emblematic of a wider inability for the state to understand its role in alleviating these issues.
So what COVID-19 did, gentlemen, by the way, who's Ruben?
Ruben is the technical support.
Okay.
He's the boss.
What COVID-19 did do was give us a golden opportunity to what I would call press the reset button, to try to understand that and recognize, more important, to recognize that we have deep underlying fundamental structural problems in Trinidad and Tobago. And they are not, it's not insurmountable. These are not insurmountable problems, but we keep ignoring them, we keep glossing over them, we keep putting plasters on the sores, and we keep kicking the can down the road. So just to name a few, in my opinion, the minister continues to ignore and not deal with, that continues to create major problems for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The whole issue of the economy, in terms of the diversification of it, in terms of creating the ease of doing business, which we've spoken about. You alluded to productivity and competitiveness. These are serious, major structural problems that are not impossible to resolve, but you've got to hit them head on. The issue of food security and the long-standing problems of land tenure, gluts in the market, predatory larceny, water, either too much or too little, infrastructural issues in terms of access and in terms of access into and out of farms, the issue of financing and so on. And the third and very important area, which is what I mentioned, inclusive growth, because exclusive eventually to social decay and social problems and upheaval. The whole issue of inequity in our society, which COVID, of course, highlighted, people's access to healthcare. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's common knowledge that if you are, if you become gravely ill, unless you can afford to go to a private institution, your future would be very dim going to a public institution. And so therefore, you create a situation in a society where only if you have money, you can live a long, healthy life. That's the reality where we are. The whole issue of homelessness, the whole issue of domestic violence, the issue of inequities in education, where a lot of people who may not have access to electronic devices they may have an electronic device, but it's useless because they live in a rural area where there is no internet access. These are all serious, fundamental challenges, structural problems that we need to confront. In addition, of course, we have the issue of crime that is a major deterrent for business activity and for any other kind of activity, leisure activity, and all kinds of things. We have traffic situation, which you just talked about, Paul. The whole issue of mental health in Trinidad and people's state of mind and their ability to, be calm at work and be productive at work and to be
just
calm.
quality of life. Just quality of life.
Yeah,
just spending 4 hours a day in traffic.
Yeah, you have the flooding issue that has existed for 50, 40 years. Report after report has just been filed in people's desk drawers. And then you talk about the reform of the public service. Because ultimately, whatever policy decisions are made by policymakers and ministers in particular, government in particular, cabinet, we have to rely on the public service to be able to dispense those goods and services in an efficient manner. So those are all serious problems. And the reality is you cannot just leave it to chance and hope that somebody will fix it or it will fix itself. We are a small country of 1.3 million people. We have vast resources, regardless of what the Minister of Finance has told us. We are in this financial position, and I've heard it being said recently that, the Minister of Finance has found himself in a difficult position because of our revenue position. Well, the point is that this is all self-inflicted. It's all self-inflicted. We have not had a single year of growth in the last 6 years. A Minister of Finance will stand in Parliament and he will tell you that the rest of the world is in the same position, but that's actually not true. Because if you were to look at over the last, say, 2014 to 2021, year period, 2015 to 2021, our GDP in real numbers, not nominal GDP, but real GDP, has declined by 15.7%. What does that mean? That means that what you could have bought in terms of obviously per capita, that means we have less GDP per capita. So when he says that our GDP in nominal terms is I think he had $195 million, what he's not taking into account is the inflationary aspect in the cost of production of those goods. And if you peel back inflation, we've actually regressed by close to 16% in terms of GDP. And let me put this in context. The rest of the CARICOM region, who have no oil and gas, improved by 3.4% in the same period. And the rest of the world improved by 24%. in that same period.
Facing the same external conditionalities.
Absolutely. So it is not, I'm not even going to say it's not true. It's absolutely false to say that we find ourselves in this position because of what's happening across the world. When the minister talks about the fact that our reserves are at 6.8 million and he bumps up his chest and beats it and pats himself on the back, and that we have 8 months of cover, what is our reality? That $6.8 billion is, if you were to strip out of that the external loans in US dollars that goes into the reserves, if you were to strip out of that the money that's been taken out of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which goes into the reserves, and if you were to strip out of that the SDRs that were gifted to us by the IMF last year, $644 million, we are actually down to reserves of about $1.7 billion, which is less than 2 months cover. So everything is being masked by the minister to suit his own purposes. If you think about this. We ought to be today maximizing our value and our revenues on oil and gas and on petrochemicals, because they are in short supply across the world through no making of our own, right? The Minister of Finance had absolutely nothing to do with the increased revenues that's coming into our coffers. But yet still, having projected production in oil of 86,000 barrels a day last year, that this year would be 86,000. Where are we today, Paul? We're down to 57,000 barrels per day. In oil, he had in natural gas, he had predicted 3.2 billion scuffs. Where are we today? 6 billion scuffs. Right? Our ammonia, our urea, and our methanol production is down. We are down in urea production by 34%. We are down in methanol and ammonia by 8.7 and 8.6% respectively. Okay. Now, had we been where we ought to have been in terms of production levels, we would be doubling our revenue today. We would be talking of a revenue base of not 50 odd billion, which he talked about in the budget, but close to $100 billion. Now, that is incompetence as far as I'm concerned, because here we have an opportunity that has been created, our own making, of course, but we have an opportunity to maximize our monetary gains on an international basis, and we've missed the boat yet again. We've missed it. And here we are telling the population that we're doing great, that everything is going to be fine, and the rest of the world is struggling just like we are. Well, those are just...
Why is the business community so silent on these issues? And I asked the question in the context of Dr. Vaalmikki. Arjoon was just on with us, and he was concerned about the credibility of the numbers coming out of the minister budget after budget, the projections, etc. Mrs. Nunes-Teixeira was concerned, and most of the people who we have had on, people could say, well, we're choosing X and Y, but we try to be as balanced as possible, have articulated concerns. Even with the spotlight on the economy presentation a couple of weeks ago, a question was asked directly to the minister about the credibility of his numbers not bearing fruit over the last couple of years. And that certainly will have some impact on public business trust and confidence, and the ability of the business community, the private sector, to make plans and projections based on those articulations of the minister. So why are they so silent on what should be a critical issue of credibility? Even if they are projections, that is what the expertise is for, to look at the scenario, look at the global factors and circumstances, and make what some would consider conservative but credible projections.
I'm going to make a crucial point here, and it's important. One of the reasons why the business community and others are not as vociferous as they need to be is that our institutions of state do not work effectively and efficiently. And so therefore, in many instances, because our institutions of state are not functioning as they ought to be, what happens is that in many instances, getting something to work requires an intervention by a minister of government. Understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
If the institutions of state were independent truly and they were strong, then you would find more people speaking up because they would not be at the mercy of a minister who could make an intervention, prevent or to victimize a person in future.
But that's not exclusive to this government. A lot of this is not exclusive to this government.
No, absolutely.
Governments hold governments accountable for decades.
Absolutely. Government, you see, it is in the interest of ministers, particularly those who are insecure in their portfolios, and governments in particular, to ensure that institutions are not strong. Because when institutions are strong, they are independent and they can function on their own. And if you do not need a minister's intervention to give you a favor, then there are no favors to be gotten back in return. And so therefore, it is in the interest of insecure and incompetent ministers of government and governments as a whole to keep institutions weak.
Are you saying that that's a default position of administrations generally? No matter who governs.
I'm agreeing, Richard. I'm agreeing with you that this is a position that this is why we find ourselves. And I am not allocating all of the blame of taking place in the for all of our ills of taking place in the last 7 years. We are where we are today because of 50 years of malgovernance, 50 years of malfeasance, 50 years of incompetence. That's our reality. You know, until we as a people say, look, it's hurting too much now and enough is enough. Because, you know, I've said this, you know, guys, I've said this before. If you pick up somebody and make them a member of parliament who has never achieved anything in his or her life, and that person eventually becomes a minister of government, handling a portfolio of billions of dollars and in control of the lives of all of the people of this country in whatever way, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's, you know, whatever ministry, what outcome do you truly expect as a citizen when you have put your finger and placed that person in that position? Why would you complain thereafter? If we do not insist on people of competence, it's like I said last night on another program. If you just picked up somebody off the street and say, here you are, you're going to run the Massey group from tomorrow morning, what outcome do you expect? And should we complain if you get a negative outcome, which is likely to be the case, most likely to be the case? Well, you know, at the end of the day, we go to a doctor to look after our health. We don't go to our neighbor next door because he's our friend. We don't go to a family member out of loyalty. We go to the best doctor we can afford because our life is important to us. But yet still we entrust our lives and the future of our children and future generations to people who are totally incompetent without a care in the world, and then expect a different outcome, and then we complain about it. Well, that is our reality, right?
You don't paint a very
and you know, I hear you, Vasant, and obviously there's a transformation that has to take place. Is this transformation government driven? Is it public sector driven? Is it a combination of both in taking the country to some innovative place? And if it rests with the government, particularly if that's your perspective, what kind of change we need to see in terms of the leadership of whatever party that's leading us forward?
So the government has to set the tone and the direction and instill the confidence in the private sector to invest. It has to instill the confidence in young people like Vaalmikki, Arjoon, and a young lady who I admire a lot, who was on a program with me last night, Ragoobarsingh, to want to stay and live in Trinidad and Tobago, to contribute to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. When you listen to a lot of young people who are starting out their lives, they're young professionals, they have a young family, they want to invest in something, in a house, they want to invest in a car, they want to invest in their lives. You want to create an environment that is welcoming, and you want to create an environment that is safe, and you want to create an environment that creates opportunities for them to stay in Trinidad and Tobago, because these young people are the very same young people, once they leave at the ages of in their early 30s, they're never returning. What they're going to do is to build, they're going to build the economies and the corporations and other countries in which they live. And then, as I said, they're not coming back because once they are entrenched in those societies, they have a young family, they have mortgages to pay, they have to send their children to school and so on and so forth. They are lost to Trinidad and Tobago. And it's very likely that their children are also lost to Trinidad and Tobago. So future generations are lost also. So a government needs to create the enabling environment for many different factors to not just survive, but to thrive and to have confidence that the future holds, the future for them is a glowing one and better than going elsewhere to deposit themselves.
How does a government, and I mean, you're talking about something that's so esoteric in a kind of way, because you're talking about confidence, you're talking about hope, you're talking about optimism. How does a government navigate that in terms of how they translate that?
Yeah, Richard, that stems from government's actions, right, and government's credibility. When a minister of finance gets up from 2016 to 2021 and continues to talk about the revenue authority and continues to talk about gaming legislation and continues to talk about local government and national institute, statistical institute, and continues to talk about special economic zones and the national ID, and none of it is done. And he says the same thing for 5 or 6 years every year. And in every government, every budget, there's no accountability or measurability of how far the government has reached, because there's no accomplishments to say, we said we were going to do this last year, we've done this. We said we we're going to do this in 2018, there was a slight hiccup, but it's done now. But every budget is, we are going to do this. Notice that. We're going to do this in 2023. We're going to do it. 2024 will come in and say the same thing. Now, not everybody is stupid. Not everybody's a sycophant. Not everybody's going to go rah, 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 listen to how great this budget is. The reality is young people, young professionals are going to be listening, and they're going to say, well, wait now. Didn't he say that in 2016 and in 2017? And he must think we are fools. So there's a credibility issue because there's a lack of accountability that creates this gap, that creates this sense of hopelessness about earlier on. And
but isn't it also on a fundamental level, even if you don't assess it that way, isn't it also for the ordinary citizen a fundamental question? Is my life getting better? Isn't it that's what it is for the ordinary citizen? Is my life getting better?
Absolutely. And this is why I started our discussion by saying that any budget in today's world that's being read can no longer be a bookkeeping exercise, but has to be one that creates robust, resilient, and inclusive growth. And you must feel at the end of the day that if you make certain sacrifices, that you are part of the process, be a time frame within which, if you are told that for the next year, sacrifices have to be made, you must know that by the end of the next year, and you must have the credible evidence based on previous promises, that by the end of this next year, your life is going to be better, and that the sacrifice was the sacrifice that you made. And that's a simple reality of human existence.
And I think compounding that is, if you see your life not getting better, but the lives of other groups getting better, it is compounded.
Absolutely.
In the same country.
Absolutely. Now, you see, there are going to be certain participants in an economy who is in a position to take advantage of certain situations. And there are going to be certain people at different levels of the economic strata who will not have those opportunities to be able to take advantage. And those, it is again human nature. If you place people in an advantageous situation, by nature, in the majority of cases, they will take advantage of that situation to the detriment of those who are unable to do that. And that is where the inequities and the inequalities in society have to be addressed through creating opportunities for those who have less. And I'm saying that this budget does not do that. Now, when the Minister of Finance flippantly says, oh, well, you know, the price of fuel in United States is X and the price of fuel in Barbados is Y and so on, and it's so much more than in Trinidad and Tobago. What he fails to tell the population is the disposable income in the person in the tax or the citizen in the United States is far greater because the minimum wage is far greater than it is in Trinidad and Tobago. So it is not a question of what the price is. It is simply a question of what the purchasing power of the money that you have in your pocket can afford. So the price of gas could be $100 a gallon. It's irrelevant if you have $10,000 a month coming in as your salary or $50,000 coming in as your salary. The price becomes irrelevant. The price of food becomes irrelevant if you can afford it because the minimum wage is 3 times what it is today. So it's not the price or the cost of the matter of the issue is the matter. The issue is what can the citizen afford based on the purchasing power of the money that he or she has in her pocket or his pocket.
Vasant, I want to ask the same question that I had asked Mrs. Teixeira, and well, Vaalmikki didn't get a chance to answer me. Is there anything positive about this budget?
Really and truly, there's nothing that I can see that's going to make a difference to the lives of the people in Trinidad and Tobago. Even when you look at using the trickle-down effect of investments coming into the country, and you look at what's being given to the energy sector, which is our main revenue stream, the fact that the minister and the ministry and the government has not done a proper assessment for a new oil and gas regime, it tells me that the numbers that he's pulled with regard to SPT for small operators offshore and larger operators in shallow waters are just numbers he's pulled to say that he's doing something about the energy incentives. Because without an in-depth assessment of the oil and gas sector internationally, and without coming up with a proper regime for oil and gas taxation in Trinidad and Tobago and comparing us with what exists outside to be able to gather the investment dollar into our energy sector, essentially he's just guessing. So I don't believe off the top of my head that those reductions, which is an increase of the SPT, SPT only kicks in when you get to 4,000 barrels a day for small operators, and the reduction in the tiered values from 18% to 15% and from 25% to 20% for larger operators. I don't think that's sufficient, and I think that's just that is just guessing and just putting a number there without understanding truly what will encourage people to invest in Trinidad and Tobago. When you look at the paltry amount of $50,000 that's been given to new investment in machinery, well, I don't know, what is that, a snow cone machine that you're asking someone to buy? That's what you're charging? I mean, it is just, to me, it is almost laughable, the incentives that the minister has put together. It really, and I don't want to sound partisan because and I don't want to sound, as though because I am not a PNM member, I am criticizing for this. I'm trying to give my most balanced opinion based on my experience, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but having lived and worked in many other places across the world. And I just feel that the minister continues to mislead the country as to what our true economic situation is. But more importantly than that, he continues to put in place policies that are not going to be helpful to the lives of the citizens and the improvement in quality of lives of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. Well, I don't know if Paul and Richard have anything else to add. And are we taking calls, Steve, for Mr. Barr?
All right.
Steve is on mute. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, we just have a minute and a half again before we wrap up with Vasant. Anything you want to?
You know, I want to also mention that there's some big ticket items that in the budget that should have been discussed because they're important to the national economy. The minister said nothing about Petrotrim. Not a single word. The minister said nothing about ArcelorMittal, which has been shut down now for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It's a white elephant, just wasting away an asset that just absolutely wasting away. The minister said nothing about I just talked about the oil and gas regime and where the country has where the government's reached in terms of determining that. The minister said nothing about transfer price policy legislation, which he talked about, I guess, in 2016, as having lost billions of dollars because of transfer pricing by the international operators here. The minister said nothing about how we're going to incorporate migrants into the workforce who are now becoming a larger and larger part of our citizenry in Trinidad and Tobago. The minister said nothing about how we are going to encourage real foreign direct investment into Trinidad and Tobago, which has declined significantly, particularly in the non-energy sector. And you guys may remember that a United Nations report in 2021 highlighted the fact that Trinidad and Tobago received the least amount of foreign direct investment in the entire region.
But Mr. Bharat,
yes.
you wanted a 6-hour presentation. He did preface everything by saying that other line ministers would go deeper into a lot of the issues, you know. So I don't know if he had said anything about all what you say he didn't say about, then we just see them might have still been talking.
Well, the fact is he should have not spoken a lot of the rubbish for 3 hours and actually put in a lot of these important issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that these can't be by the way issues. These are significant issues to the development of Trinidad and Tobago.
Should we at least wait and see if the different line ministers at least raise it? So then we could then say, well, listen, the government has not addressed these concerns.
Well, I guess you could do, but I'm suggesting to you that if these were such important matters that they should have been raised at the expense of a lot of the rubbish that he talked about for 4 hours.
Well, potato.
Well, it's not potato. It's potato and something completely different. And therein lies the issue. These are not minuscule problems. These are not issues to be politicking about. These are serious issues that determines, it's very easy, for a position where 10 years down the road, we wonder, well, how the hell did we reach here? And these are the reasons why we will reach there.
Yeah. Well, we reached there now. So we should be more than 10 years ago. Mr. Bharat, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time and your contribution. Have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you.
All the best to you. Take care. All right. Okay, taking a quick break. Be right back.
Recording
It's
stop.
hot. Furniture Plus September mattress sale is sizzling. Get therapeutic mattresses starting from just $999 plus free gifts when you